They mocked the quiet veteran on the ridge, until the night their world froze, and only his strange wooden structure kept an entire town alive. When Lucas Bennett and his loyal canine Harper started building a bizarre wooden frame around their lonely mountain cabin, the whole town laughed. But when the deadliest winter storm in decades crashed down on Maplewood Hollow, every mocking voice went silent, and every desperate family turned toward the one man they misunderstood. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The first morning, Lucas Bennett set foot on Ashfall Ridge. The air carried a kind of quiet he had almost forgotten. Thin, sharp, and honest. The kind of quiet that felt like it belonged to the mountains long before people ever came here. His boots sank slightly into the frostbitten ground as he stepped out of the old pickup, the weight of his duffel bag. Beside him, Harper jumped out after a single command, landing softly, ears turning in every direction like tiny satellite dishes, catching signals only he understood. The cabin sat at the edge of a timber line, half swallowed by evergreens and half exposed to the Colorado wind. Weathered wood, sagging porch. A roof patched so many times it looked like a quilt, stitched by someone who couldn't decide on a pattern. It wasn't much, but it was what his aunt had left him. And more importantly, it was far away from everything Lucas wanted to forget. Harper circled once, sniffed the steps, then looked back at Lucas for approval. Lucas nodded. "Yeah," he murmured. "It's home now." He didn't know if he was trying to convince Harper or himself. Down the winding gravel road, a rust-red SUV slowed. Lucas didn't turn, but he felt eyes on him, the way people looked at newcomers in small towns. Curiosity first, judgment next. Maplewood Hollow wasn't a place where people moved in often. The SUV lingered long enough to make Harper rise to attention, tail stiff, then rolled on when Lucas lifted a hand in a neutral gesture. He exhaled. First contact. Not great. Inside the cabin, the air smelled like dust and forgotten winters. Lucas pushed open the windows to let the cold mountain air sweep through. Harper padded across the creaking floorboards, nose brushing against furniture draped with white sheets. Every few steps, Harper paused, turning toward the doorway, alert to sounds only he could hear. Lucas set his duffel bag down and stretched his shoulder, feeling the familiar tug of old scar tissue. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, like the pause before something breaks. That same silence he'd learned to fear overseas. A silence full of waiting. He shook off the thought and stepped outside to unload the last few boxes from the truck. As he lifted one marked tools, he heard faint voices drifting from the road. Two women walked side by side, bundled in jackets, glancing toward the cabin. "That's him," one whispered. "The veteran who bought Eleanor's place. They say he's different." Lucas pretended not to hear. Harper didn't. The dog let out a single low rumble. Not a growl, but a warning that made the women stop in their tracks. They hesitated, murmured apologies, and hurried along the path. Lucas touched Harper's neck gently. "Easy, boy," he said quietly. Harper leaned into his hand for a moment, grounding him the way he always did, then resumed scanning the ridge. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing. Lucas walked around the cabin perimeter, taking in the land. The pines whispered with the wind. The ridge rose steeply behind the cabin, jagged and imposing, like a stone spine cutting the sky. The world felt huge out here, larger than any battlefield, yet just as unpredictable. He paused, breathing in the cold air until it steadied him. Harper nudged his leg once, sensing the shift inside him. Lucas gave a small nod. "I'm fine," he said, even though neither of them believed it entirely. As evening settled, a few more townsfolk passed by. An old man in a blue pickup, a teenage boy on an ATV, a couple walking their dog. All of them slowed. All of them stared. All of them kept moving before Lucas had a chance to speak. A familiar ache crept into his chest. He'd known this feeling in other forms, the space between him and the world, the quiet suspicion people had of anyone who carried shadows on their face. He had worn those shadows long before he arrived here, and he expected they'd stay. When the sun dipped behind Ashfall Ridge, Lucas stood on the porch and watched the sky turn from gold to bruised purple. Harper sat beside him, posture straight, gaze fixed on the treeing. The dog didn't relax, not even as the last birds returned to their nests. "You feel it too, huh?" Lucas whispered. The mountains seemed to hold their breath. The wind paused in its tracks. Even the trees stood unnaturally still. Something was coming. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But the ridge had that look like an animal waiting to move. Lucas rested a hand on Harper's back. "We'll be ready," he said softly. The dog didn't look away from the forest. And Lucas didn't blame him. Because even though he had come here searching for quiet, he found something else entirely. The kind of quiet that meant the storm. And everything that came with it was only just beginning. The next morning broke cold enough to sting the lungs. Frost clung to the grass like a thin coat of glass, and every step Lucas took made a soft crunch beneath his boots. Harper walked ahead, nose low, tail steady, mapping the perimeter with the instinctive precision of a working canine. The mountains loomed pale in the early light, their peaks dusted with fresh snow that didn't belong to mid-autumn. Lucas paused beside the cabin, eyes drifting over the land, studying the angles of the wind, the way the clouds rolled a little too fast over the ridge. Something felt off. Maybe it always would, but he trusted the instinct anyway. The mountains had a language of their own, and today they were whispering. He wiped his palms on his jeans, then grabbed a bundle of long wooden stakes from the truck bed. Harper trotted beside him. As he carried the wood to the far corner of the clearing, Lucas dropped to one knee, measuring distance with the kind of deliberate movements that came from years of training. He paced out lines in the frozen dirt, marking points only he understood. And then he drove the first stake into the ground. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Harper sat a few feet away, watching every motion. By the time Lucas hammered the fifth stake, an engine rumbled on the gravel road. He didn't look up right away, but Harper did, standing, ears pry-cricked, body stiff with alertness. A faded green pickup slowed to a crawl. Mark Keller sat behind the wheel, elbow resting on the open window. He was a big man with a sun-creased face, the kind who'd lived his whole life in Maplewood Hollow. Mark's eyes scanned the stakes, then landed on Lucas. "What in the world are you building out here?" he called out, voice carrying across the clearing. Lucas wiped sweat and frost from his forehead. "Just a project. Something that needs doing." "A project?" Mark barked a laugh. "Sure looks like you're fencing in the mountain." Harper growled softly, not hostile. Just a low warning that made Mark straighten up. Lucas lifted a hand, signaling Harper to relax. Though the dog didn't drop his posture. "It's nothing like that," Lucas said. "Just preparing for winter." "Winter?" Mark scoffed. "Son, winter's a season, not a war zone. You don't need all this." He gestured broadly at the stakes. Lucas didn't answer. He didn't know explanations to a man who'd already made up his mind. Mark shook his head, still chuckling as he pulled away. "Whole town's going to have a field day with this one," he muttered, as the truck rolled off. Silence settled again, but not the peaceful kind. Harper walked over and nudged Lucas's arm. Lucas exhaled through tight lips. "I know," he whispered. "People talk. Just keep watch." Harper resumed his patrol, while Lucas continued working. By noon, a rough perimeter had begun to form. Stakes set at deliberate intervals, lines marked in the soil, a pattern that looked like chaos to anyone who didn't understand its purpose. But to Lucas, each piece mattered. Each angle, each length, each gap for airflow, each anchor point, meant to hold against crushing snow. It wasn't a fence. It was the skeleton of something that could save lives. As he prepared the next section, a soft crunch of footsteps came from the path. Harper responded instantly, trotting toward the sound. Lucas turned to find a young woman approaching, brown coat, knitted scarf, cautious expression. Emily Barnes, owner of the Maplewood post office. Lucas had met her once when picking up a package. She'd been polite but distant, like someone unsure how close to stand beside grief they didn't recognize. "Hi," she said gently. "Didn't mean to intrude. Just saw you out here working." Lucas nodded. "Morning." Emily's eyes drifted to the rows of stakes. "Are you putting up some kind of pen for livestock?" "No livestock," Lucas replied. Her brows pulled together. "Then what's it for?" Before he could answer, Harper positioned himself between them. Not aggressive, but alert, guarding. Emily took a tiny step back. "He's protective," she said softly. "He's trained to be," Lucas replied. Emily hesitated, eyes flicking from Harper to the unfinished structure. "Well, if you need supplies or tools, my brother runs the hardware shop. Just tell him I sent you." "Thank you," Lucas said. "I might stop by." She nodded awkwardly and walked away, glancing back twice. Harper didn't move until she was out of sight. When he finally relaxed, Lucas knelt beside him. "You're doing good," he whispered, scratching behind Harper's ear. "I know you don't trust them yet." "I don't either." The afternoon passed with steady work. Boards were aligned, measurements rechecked, stakes reinforced. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the unfinished frame cast long, jagged shadows across the clearing. To anyone passing by, it probably looked strange, maybe even threatening. A half-built fortress with no clear purpose. And right on cue, another vehicle slowed at the road. This time it was Sheriff Cole Matthews. He stepped out of his SUV with a tired grunt, adjusting his jacket against the growing chill. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who tried to look authoritative, even when he wasn't sure what he was doing. "Evening, Bennett," he said, eyeing the perimeter. "You've been putting up stakes." "Quite a few of them." Lucas leaned on the hammer. So, Matthew said, pushing his hands into his pockets. "Folks get uneasy when they see a bunch of lumber arranged like a military outpost." Harper stepped closer, quiet, but present. Matthews swallowed hard. "You planning something?" the sheriff asked. "Something the town should know about." Lucas didn't answer at first. He let the silence sit there, heavy as the cold. Then, "Just building what I need." Matthews frowned. "This looks like a whole lot more than that." Lucas lifted another stake. "Then you're looking wrong." The sheriff exhaled, frustrated. "Look, Bennett, I get you've had a hard past. Folks know your record. But this is a quiet town. People want to feel safe. Then let them stay on their side of the fence," Lucas said, voice low. Matthews hesitated. "You're not making this easy." "It's not meant to be easy." He drove the last stake of the day into the frozen ground, the hammer's impact rolling across the ridge. Matthews flinched at the sound, mumbled something under his breath, then climbed back into his SUV. As the sheriff drove off, Harper pressed against Lucas's leg, sensing his tension. "I know," Lucas murmured. "They think I'm losing it. Maybe they always will." He looked at the skeletal structure rising around the cabin. To everyone else, it was a strange, unnecessary project. To him, It was the first step toward keeping a promise carved deep inside his bones. The wind sharpened, colder than the night before. Harper tilted his head, listening to something distant, something hidden beyond the treeing. Lucas followed the dog's gaze, feeling it again. That quiet, unsettling murmur in the mountain air. "Whatever's coming," he whispered. "We'll be ready." Harper stayed there beside him, listening to the ridge like it was speaking directly to him. And for a long moment, the whole mountain seemed to hold its breath. That night the wind returned. Not loud, not violent, but restless. It tapped at the cabin walls like a memory begging to be let in. Lucas lay awake on the old cot, hands folded over his chest, eyes fixed on the wooden beams above him. Harper slept nearby, curled yet alert, one ear twitching with every shift in the air. Lucas turned onto his side, pulling the blanket tighter. The mountain cold seeped through the cabin door, needling at his skin, and something inside him tightened. He knew this temperature, this smell, this weight in the air. It was the same cold that used to settle over the mountains overseas, right before the night turned dangerous. He sat up suddenly, breath-catching. The room was dark, but familiar. Still, his pulse raced, muscles bracing without permission. Harper lifted his head immediately, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "I'm fine," Lucas murmured, though the words wavered. A gust of wind struck the cabin, rattling the window frame. The sound cracked something open inside him. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, trying to slow the rising avalanche of memory. But it came anyway. A different mountain, a different cold, a different night. He saw snow swirling around the canvas shelters, heard the frantic calls of his unit as temperatures plunged, supplies collapsing under weight. They weren't built for breath, turning to frost before it even left their mouths. The cold invading everything. Hands, boots, bone, thought. The kind of cold that stole strength long before it stole breath. He swallowed hard. He could still feel the frostbite biting through his gloves, still hear the sudden silence of men who had been speaking moments before, still sense Harper's smaller, younger shape pressed tightly against him, trying to keep him anchored before the medic reached them. The memory hit too fast, too bright. Lucas tensed, hands shaking, eyes unfocused, as the room flickered between past and present. Harper rose instantly, stepping close. The dog nudged Lucas's arm, insistent. When Lucas didn't respond, Harper climbed halfway onto the cot, pressing his weight gently against Lucas's chest. A grounding technique, one he had been trained for. Lucas inhaled sharply, then again. Harper stayed there, warm and steady, until Lucas's breathing found a rhythm again. The room settled back into place. The walls, the wooden floor, the crack under the cabin door, where the wind slid in like a whisper. No snowstorm, no unit, no shouts, just the quiet hum of Ashfall Ridge. Lucas wiped his face with a rough hand. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely. "You always know." Harper nuzzled his chin, then rested his head on Lucas's knee, refusing to move until the tension in Lucas's shoulders softened. Only then did the dog step back, though he kept one paw touching Lucas's boot. A final reassurance. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He spoke into the silence, voice low. "It's been years," he murmured, "and it still feels like it happened last night." The wind slipped through the trees again. Harper's ears twitched, but he didn't break eye contact. Lucas pushed himself to his feet and lit the small lantern on the table. Warm light filled the cabin, scattering the shadows that had grown too long. He paced once, twice, trying to walk off the shaking in his hands. Harper followed at his heel, matching each step. "People think I'm building something unnecessary," Lucas said into the dim room. "Maybe they think I'm paranoid. Maybe they think I'm broken." He blinked slowly, but they didn't see what cold can do. He returned to the window and looked out toward the ridge. The moon hung pale above the treetops, casting thin silver light across the half-frozen ground. Harper bumped his leg gently, reminding him to come back to the present. "I'm not doing this for me," Lucas whispered. "I'm doing it because I won't watch anyone freeze again. Not here. Not in this town." Harper stepped closer, leaning against his thigh. Lucas rested a hand on the dog's back. "You keep me steady," he said softly. "Always have." The night moved slowly. Eventually, the tremors inside Lucas faded to something small, something he could set aside. He lay back down on the cot. Harper curled beside him in a protective crescent. The old cabin creaked from settling timber, but the storm inside Lucas had calmed for now. Before sleep took him, he whispered, "Tomorrow, we build more." When dawn arrived, pale light spilling across the mountains, Lucas stood outside again with a fresh sense of purpose. The stakes and beams waited for him like silent sentries. Harper trotted ahead, checking the perimeter, then returned with a short bark, as if to say the land was clear. But the weight in the air remained. Lucas picked up his tools. "Let's get to work, partner." But even as he spoke, he felt it, the faint tremor of a storm, forming far beyond the ridge, gathering strength in ways most people wouldn't notice. But Lucas and Harper always noticed. And today, the mountain didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like it was warning them. By mid-morning, the sunlight over Ashfall Ridge looked wrong. Too pale, too thin, like it was being filtered through a sheet of frozen glass. The air carried a sharpness that didn't belong to October, the kind that hinted at snowstorms still weeks away on the calendar. Lucas tightened the strap of his tool belt as Harper walked ahead of him, moving with a low, deliberate focus, ears constantly swiving toward the ridge. Lucas paused and lifted his head, closing one eye as he measured the direction of the wind. It blew downward along the slope instead of up, an inversion pattern he had learned to fear overseas. Cold fronts that moved like that didn't just bring snow. They brought the kind of crushing weather that swallowed entire camps before anyone knew to react. Harper let out a short, uneasy bark. "I know," Lucas murmured. "I feel it too." He knelt beside a half-finished row of posts and placed a hand on the frost-covered soil. The ground was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that traveled upward from deep within the earth, not down from the sky. Something was brewing far beyond what Maplewood Hollow's residents were prepared for. Lucas picked up his hammer again, but paused. When he heard the crunch of tires rolling toward the cabin, Harper snapped to attention, standing like a soldier, ready for deployment. A county patrol SUV pulled into view. Sheriff Cole Matthews stepped out with a soft grunt, pulling his coat tight. The man squinted against the glare of the sun bouncing off frost. He approached slowly, eyes drifting over the structure rising around the cabin. "Morning, Bennett," he said, voice cautious. "Looks like you've kept busy." "I work better when I'm left alone," Lucas replied. Matthews exhaled, fog curling from his lips. "We got folks calling in about all this. They're worried you're building something dangerous." Lucas kept hammering. "It's not dangerous." "Well, it looks like the start of a barricade." "It's not," Lucas repeated. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, studying Lucas. "You got plans for this? Some kind of blueprint?" Lucas hesitated. "I've seen what storms can do." Matthews raised a brow. "Storms? The weather service says we're getting a light system tonight. Bit of sleep maybe." Lucas shook his head. "No, the wind's wrong. Temperatures dropping too fast. Animals are moving early. I saw deer heading down the ridge before dawn. You need to warn the town. Matthews chuckled. Not crew. Just tired. Look, Bennett. I get that you've been through things. And sometimes things you've been through come back. Make normal stuff feel like danger. Harper's ears pulled back. A silent sign he didn't like the sheriff's tone. This isn't in my head, Lucas said low. Well, Matthews replied, until the weather service says different. We're not raising any alarms. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, colder than before. Lucas stepped closer to the sheriff. In Afghanistan, he began. A storm wiped out half a unit because commanders didn't listen. They trusted forecasts instead of the signs right in front of them. Matthews shifted uncomfortably. This isn't Afghanistan. That's the problem, Lucas whispered. Nobody here knows how to see danger coming. The sheriff hesitated, then sighed. I'll mention it at the afternoon briefing. That's all I can promise. Lucas didn't answer. Matthews nodded awkwardly, then backed toward his SUV. As the sheriff drove away, Harper leaned close, brushing against Lucas's leg. Lucas steadied himself, breathing out slowly. His ribs tightened, not with fear, but with frustration. He had spent years learning to read the world when it was on the edge of turning hostile. He knew what early warning signs felt like. He carried the memory of nights where the cold moved faster than orders could. He refused to let Maplewood Hollow walk blindly into the same danger. He returned to his work, hammer striking in sharp echoing blows. With each hit, the structure grew taller, more defined. A wide, reinforced frame designed to trap heat, shed snow, and protect anything stored beneath it. To another soldier, the design would have been obvious. To everyone else, it looked like something born from paranoia. A loud whistle sliced through the clearing. Harper spun, eyes locking on the hill. Lucas turned and saw two teenage boys perched on their bikes near the edge of the property. One cupped his hands around his mouth. Hey, mister, you building a fort to fight the squirrels? The boys laughed. Harper growled. Not a threat, just a warning that melted the smiles off their faces. They backed away, pedaling off as one shouted, Town's going to love this. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. It doesn't matter if they laugh, he said softly. Harper pressed his forehead to Lucas's hip, reassuring him the way only a partner could. Later that afternoon, Lucas climbed onto a ladder to secure a crossbeam. As he worked, he caught sight of dark birds flying low over the treetops, not circling for prey, but fleeing inland. The sky darkened faster than it should have, clouds rolling over the ridge like thick smoke. Harper let out a sharp bark. At the same moment, a sudden gust nearly knocked Lucas off the ladder. He steadied himself and looked out at the mountains. The ridge wasn't whispering anymore. It was warning in a voice loud enough that even a man who wanted peace couldn't ignore it. Lucas climbed down and rested a hand on Harper's collar. The dog leaned forward, scanning the horizon. It's coming, Lucas said, sooner than they think. And as the last light faded, the wind carried a cold that felt too familiar, too heavy, too fast. Like the first breath of a storm, powerful enough to change everything on Ashfall Ridge. By the next afternoon, the rumors had spread far beyond the dirt road leading to Lucas's cabin. Maplewood Hollow wasn't a large town, barely 2 blocks of shops, a diner, a feed store, a post office. But news traveled through it quicker than wildfire on a dry ridge. And the news of the day was simple. The new veteran on Ashfall Ridge was building something strange. People didn't whisper anymore. They said it outright. When Lucas drove into town for supplies, heads turned. Conversations softened, then sharpened again the moment he passed. Harper sat tall in the passenger seat, watching every movement on the sidewalks as if guarding a convoy instead of an old pickup. Lucas parked near Miller's Hardware. As he stepped out, Mark Keller leaned against his own truck nearby, arms crossed, smirk fixed in place. "Well, if it isn't the mountain builder himself," Mark called. "How's Fort Bennett coming along?" Lucas ignored him and lifted a bag of feed from the truck bed. Harper growled quietly, a soft vibration more than a sound. Mark took a half step back before catching himself and regaining his bravado. "Easy there," Mark muttered, just making conversation. Lucas didn't answer. He walked toward the store, but a cluster of townsfolk had already gathered outside. Martha Gray with her cane, Tom Willis from the feed shop, and a pair of teenagers Lucas recognized from the bikes near his property. Martha's eyes widened at the sight of Lucas. "Honey, you scaring folks with those wooden poles? Heard you're building some kind of bunker." Tom chimed in. "My cousin saw it yesterday. Said it looked like the start of a prison yard." A few people laughed. Lucas stared at them, jaw tightening. "It's just a frame, a structure, to keep firewood dry." One of the teenagers snorted. "Yeah, right. You building Noah's Ark up there?" Lucas stepped forward. Harper matched his steps instantly, positioning himself between Lucas and the boy. The teen's face palled, and he stumbled backward. The diner door swung open then, and Emily Barnes stepped out holding 2 cups of coffee. She paused, taking in the tense scene. "Everybody back off," she said sharply. "Let the man buy his supplies." Mark lifted both hands. "Relax, Emily. We're just having a little fun." Emily shot him a glare. "Fun is fishing at the lake, not heckling someone who just moved here." Lucas appreciated the gesture, but it didn't stop the eyes watching him as he moved past them into the hardware store. Inside, the cashier, a young woman named Olivia, fumbled nervously with the register. Mr. Bennett. Folks are talking, you know. A lot." "I know," he said quietly. "You building something big up there? Something necessary?" Olivia swallowed. "Well, people don't really understand things that look different." Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he paid for his roofing nails, rope, and lumber ties, then left the store with Harper, walking tight at his side. Outside, laughter erupted again. Low, subtle, but unmistakable. Mark Keller wasn't trying to hide it anymore. "You hear the sheriff is checking on you?" Mark called out. "Heard you're building a survival compound. Planning for the end of the world, Bennett?" Lucas paused, his back turned. The cold wind rushed between them, lifting dust from the street. Harper stiffened. Lucas didn't speak. "Not yet." Mark chuckled. "Come on. You can't expect us not to laugh. You moved out here, dug holes all over creation, and started hammering beams like you're prepping for World War II. Lucas turned his head slightly. "You don't see what's coming." "And you do?" Mark scoffed. "What?" "Because you were a soldier. This isn't a war zone. This is Maplewood Hollow." Lucas held his gaze for a long moment. Harper stepped closer, sensing the spike in tension. Finally, Lucas said, "Storms don't care about towns or people or laughter." Mark rolled his eyes. "Whatever you say, mountain man." Lucas loaded the supplies into his truck. As he climbed into the driver's seat, one of the teenagers called out, "Hey, Bennett, when the aliens land, can we hide in your fort?" More laughter. Harper barked sharp and loud enough to silence the street. The bark wasn't angry. It was the bark of a trained protector who saw a line being crossed. Harper stood on the seat, head out the window, eyes locked on the mocking crowd. Lucas didn't scold him. He put the truck in gear and drove away, the sound of laughter echoing behind them like gravel rattling in a steel drum. The road back to Ashfall Ridge wound through dense trees, each curve pulling Lucas further from the noise of town. but the laughter stayed in his head like a splinter. Halfway up the ridge, he stopped the truck and stepped out. Harper followed, tail low, reading his mood. Lucas looked at the rising clouds, swallowing the peak. "They have no idea," he whispered. "None." Harper nuzzled his hand. Back at the cabin, Lucas unloaded the supplies in silence. He walked to the structure and rested a hand on one of the newly set beams. The wood creaked softly in the wind, as if responding. The temperature had dropped again, another sign. He grabbed his tools and worked harder than he had in days, hammer striking with the force of frustration held too long inside. Harper stayed close, pacing the edge of the clearing, pausing every so often to stare toward the town below. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. Lucas wiped sweat from his brow and looked at the growing structure. Still incomplete, still misunderstood, but necessary. Absolutely necessary. He whispered into the cooling air. "Let them laugh." Harper pressed against his leg, warm, unwavering. "They'll understand soon," Lucas said. "When the cold comes for real, they'll understand." And as a harsh gust barreled through the clearing, flinging icy needles across the beams, Lucas Bennett knew with absolute certainty that Maplewood Hollow was headed towards something they were not ready for. Not even close. That night, the wind didn't just howl. It screamed across Ashfall Ridge. It pushed against the cabin walls in long, furious breaths that made the window frames tremble. Lucas stood on the porch with Harper, pressed close to his side, both staring out into the dark as clouds thickened above them, swallowing the stars. A cold front wasn't supposed to hit this early. Not in October. Not with this kind of speed. But the mountains didn't lie. Harper paced, tail stiff, nose pointed toward the western ridge where the dark mass rolled in like a living thing. The dog stopped, let out a sharp bark, then another short, high, urgent. "I hear it," Lucas whispered. Snowflakes began drifting from the sky. First slow and lazy, then faster, sharper. Driven sideways by a wind that cut like broken glass. The flakes didn't fall. They attacked. Within minutes, the ground whitened. Lucas stepped back inside and grabbed his radio, turning the dial to the local weather channel. Static crackled. Then a rushed voice broke through. "Maplewood Hollow residents. An unexpected pressure drop has accelerated tonight's winter system. Expect heavy snow and wind, gusts up to the broadcast cut off." Swallowed by static. Lucas lowered the radio. Harper didn't look away from the door. "It's starting," Lucas said, voice tight. "Earlier than even I thought." He moved through the cabin quickly, loading more wood into the stove, checking the lantern fuel, securing the rope line he'd installed earlier for whiteout conditions. Every movement was efficient, instinctive, a muscle memory built from nights overseas when preparation meant survival. Harper followed, never more than a step behind. By late evening, the storm hit with full force. Snow slammed into the cabin like handfuls of gravel. The wind wailed and bent the pines until their trunks popped. Lucas went to the window, brushing away frost, to peer outside. He couldn't see the beams of his structure anymore, only swirling white. Harper whined softly. Lucas rested a hand on his head. "It's okay. We stay put for now." A deep boom echoed across the ridge. Something heavy, collapsing under the weight of snow. Harper jerked his head upward, barking once, sharp and alarmed. "Probably a shed roof," Lucas muttered, "or a barn lean-to." He wasn't wrong. Down in Maplewood Hollow, families were discovering the truth of the storm. The flimsy lean-to firewood racks most houses used were already bowing under the heavy sleet. Logs were soaking through. Kindling turned useless. But Lucas didn't know the extent yet, only that the storm was just beginning. He turned away from the window when the radio crackled again. Residents are urged to remain indoors. Firewood supplies may become compromised. Repeat. Stay inside. Lucas clenched his jaw. They were warning people too late. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted further. A draft crept under the cabin door, despite Lucas stuffing an old towel into the gap. Harper rose from his resting spot, ears pinned back. Then another boom, louder, closer. Lucas grabbed his coat. That didn't come from town. Harper was already at the door. Lucas cracked it open just a few inches. A blast of snow rushed in, coating the floor in seconds. Whiteout conditions swallowed everything more than 5 feet away. But the direction of the noise, the north slope. Lucas whispered. Something big went down. A fallen tree, a roof collapse, an avalanche pocket releasing early. He shut the door quickly. We can't go out now, he said softly, kneeling beside Harper. Visibility's too low. We wait until morning. Harper pressed his head into Lucas's hand, but his muscles trembled, not from fear, but from readiness. The dog sensed danger, not as a future possibility, but as something pressing against the cabin walls right now. Lucas tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. The wind roared through the night, like a freight train scraping the ridge. Every few minutes, another thud or crack split the air. Branches breaking, shed roofs giving way, fences collapsing under sheets of ice. Hours passed like this. Just before dawn, the storm eased. Not ended, only paused as though inhaling before striking again. The wind lowered to a rough hum. Snow settled, instead of slashing sideways. The world outside turned into a heavy, gray silence. Lucas opened the door again. The clearing was buried in 2 feet of snow. Pine branches drooped to the ground. His half-finished structure stood, but the beams groaned under the weight. Harper trotted out beside him, paws sinking deep into powder. Lucas scanned the treeing. The world was muffled, still waiting. That wasn't the real storm, he muttered. Not yet. Harper stopped suddenly, ears shooting upward. The dog turned toward the lower ridge, toward Maplewood Hollow. Lucas narrowed his eyes. The wind carried faint echoes up the mountain. Voices, scattered shouts, muffled cries. Not panic, but fear. The kind of fear that spread through communities when things began to break. Lucas felt it in his bones. They weren't ready, he whispered. I told them they weren't ready. Harper barked once, loud and urgent. Lucas put a hand on his harness. We'll check on them soon. But first, he looked back at the structure rising around the cabin. Snow-covered, half-finished-ish. Necessary. We reinforce it, he said. Because what's coming next? He tightened his gloves and stepped into the snow. Harper close behind. Will be worse. And on the horizon, the clouds thickened again. Darker. Heavier. As if the mountain had only shown its first warning and was preparing its second. By late afternoon, the sky had taken on a strange metallic hue. The air grew dense enough that every breath felt colder going in than coming out. Lucas worked fast, reinforcing the beams of his structure, while Harper paced the perimeter with growing agitation. Is greater than. The dog kept stopping, ears snapping toward the valley below, as if something there demanded his attention. Lucas was tightening a brace when Harper suddenly froze, tail straight, muscles coiled. What is it? Lucas whispered. Harper didn't bark at first. He listened. Then sharply, one bark. Loud, urgent. Lucas's pulse quickened. Harper didn't bark like that without reason. The wind shifted, carrying a faint high sound up the ridge. It was thin, swallowed by the storm, but unmistakable to someone who had listened for distress on battlefields and mountainsides alike. A child's cry. Lucas's body reacted before his mind did. He dropped the wrench and sprinted to the cabin. Grabbing the coil of lifeline rope, he'd prepared for whiteout conditions. Harper ran beside him, whining softly with intensity. "Stay close," Lucas said as he tied the rope around his waist. "We don't have time to think this through." Harper nudged the knot with his nose as if checking its security. Outside the cabin, the wind blasted them sideways. Snow whipped across the clearing, turning the world into a swirling sheet of white. Lucas leaned into the storm, shielding his eyes with his arm. "Harper!" he shouted over the gale. "Find." Harper plunged into the snowstorm without hesitation. Low, focused, cutting through drifts with powerful strides. The rope tightened as Lucas followed, his boots sinking deep into the powder. Each step was a struggle, the cold hitting his face like needles. But Harper's silhouette guided him through the white void. The cries grew faint, then clearer, carried between gusts. They were coming from the Keller property. Lucas's muscles tightened. Mark Keller might have spent the last 2 weeks mocking him, but a child's cry reset every line, every argument, every wound. Through the snow, a shape appeared. Small, hunched, nearly swallowed by the drifts. Harper reached her first, circling her, barking in short bursts to keep her conscious. "Mia." Lucas breathed as he dropped to his knees beside her. The little girl's fingers were curled tight against her chest. Her cheeks flushed a dangerous shade. Her breaths were shallow, wobbling. She lifted her head weakly. "Can't find the shed," she whispered. Lucas didn't waste a second. He wrapped his arms around her and lifted her gently. She clung to him instinctively, her face pressing into the warmth of his coat. "It's okay. I've got you," he said, voice steady. Despite the storm pounding against them, Harper barked again, urging them back the way they came. Lucas followed the pull of the rope, guiding them toward the cabin. Every few steps, he checked Mia's breathing. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Stay awake for me." Harper trotted close, brushing against Lucas's leg to help keep him balanced on the shifting ground. The wind surged suddenly, shoving them sideways. Lucas tightened his grip on Mia and crouched lower, letting Harper brace against him. The dog's body acted like a shield, legs planted firmly in the snow. When the gust eased, they pushed forward. 10 more feet. 5. The outline of the cabin appeared through the white. Lucas burst through the door, slamming it shut behind him. The cabin's warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. He set Mia near the stove, layering blankets over her trembling body. Harper lay down close to her, lending his heat. For a moment, the girl simply breathed long, shaky breaths that slowly steadied. Lucas checked her hands and face. "You're lucky," he said softly. "Any longer out there," and he didn't finish the sentence. Harper nudged his elbow, as if to pull him away from the darker thoughts. Mia blinked up at him. I just wanted to get wood. Daddy said we needed more." Lucas felt a weight settle heavily in his chest. "Where was your father?" He went to look for me," she whispered. "Then I couldn't see anything. Of the snow. It was everywhere." Harper whimpered, placing his head gently on her knee. "You're safe now," Lucas said. "Both of you will be." Mia's eyes filled with tears. Daddy said, "You're strange, but you're nice." Lucas looked away, jaw tightening, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to name. A loud crack echoed outside, the sound of another structure giving way under the growing weight of the storm. Mia flinched. Harper jumped to his feet. Lucas rose and went to the window. The sky had darkened again, a solid sheet of gray pressing down on the ridge. Snow fell faster now, thicker, the flakes merging into a curtain that blurred the world. The storm wasn't finished. It was only escalating. He turned to Harper. "We're not done, buddy." Harper lowered his head, acknowledging the truth. Lucas looked back at Mia. Then, at the storm raging outside his fragile wooden cabin. "They weren't ready," he murmured. "But we'll help them anyway. Because that's what you did. Whether it was a battlefield or a mountain town that didn't understand you, you helped, you protected, you endured." And as the second wave of the storm gathered its strength, Lucas knew he and Harper would be out there again soon, no matter what waited in the white. The storm returned before the sun fully set, rolling over Ashfall Ridge like a living wall. The temperature plunged so fast the windows in the cabin fogged and frosted in minutes. Snow battered the roof with relentless force, each gust shaking the rafters, like a warning that the mountain was just getting started. Mia lay bundled near the stove, her breathing steadier now. Harper stayed beside her, keeping his body warm against her legs. Lucas checked her pulse again, then added more wood to the fire. Dry wood, the kind that burned strong and bright, the kind he'd spent weeks preparing while the town laughed. A deep boom echoed outside. Another collapsed structure, but closer this time. Harper's ears shot up. Lucas grabbed his coat. "I know," he whispered. "We're going." Harper nudged Mia gently before moving to Lucas's side. The dog's expression said everything. "She's safe now. Go help the next one." Lucas secured the rope around his waist, tied the other end to a support beam inside the cabin, and cracked the door open. Snow blasted into the room instantly. Mia whimpered in her sleep. Lucas pulled his hood tight. "Stay with me, Harper," he said. The dog answered with a sharp bark and plunged into the storm. They moved into the whiteout like ghosts tied to a lifeline. Visibility was almost nothing, just swirling snow and shadows. Harper guided the way, nose low, tail straight, every sense tuned to the faintest signs of distress. Soon, a dim light flickered through the storm, a lantern waving weakly near the creek. Lucas and Harper pushed toward it, snow dragging at their boots and paws. They found Nora Hayes, the elderly widow, half buried beside her porch steps, clutching the lantern with shaking hands. "Lucas," she gasped. "I slipped. Couldn't get back up." Harper pressed close to her, warming her side. Lucas lifted her gently. "Hold on to me," he said. "Let's get you home." He tied the rope around her waist and led her back through the storm. Harper, guiding them with sharp, precise movements. When they reached the cabin, he settled Nora beside Mia, wrapped her in blankets, and handed her warm tea. But they weren't done. Not even close. Harper barked again, this time with a sharper pitch. Another call for help carried on the wind. Lucas felt it too, a deep tug in his chest, like a compass pointing toward danger. They stepped out once more. The wind fought them like a living enemy. Snow slammed into Lucas's back as he trudged through drifts up to his knees. Harper battled forward, unwavering. A few minutes later, they reached the old blacksmith shop. The roof had partially collapsed, pinning Tom Willis under the porch awning. Lucas dropped to his knees, hands digging through snow and splintered wood. "Tom, can you hear me?" A faint groan answered him. Harper clawed at the snow beside Lucas, helping uncover the trapped man. Lucas heaved the broken beam upward with everything he had. His shoulders burned, his ribs protested. But the beam lifted enough for Tom to crawl out. Lucas grabbed him under the arms and hauled him free. "That's it," Lucas said. "Stay with me." Harper circled them anxiously, barking into the wind as if urging the storm itself to let them pass. Back to the cabin they went, Tom stumbling, Lucas gripping him tightly, Harper carving a path through the drifts. Tom collapsed inside, breath shaking. "You saved me," Tom whispered. "I thought I was done." Lucas didn't answer. He was already listening to the storm. It had grown louder, angrier. Harper's body went rigid. Another cry. This one farther away, but real. Terribly real. Lucas's stomach dropped. "That came from Keller's place," he said. Harper barked twice. Confirmation. They resecured the rope, though Lucas knew it might not be enough this time. The storm was too strong, the distance too great. But they had no choice. Is greater than. They plunged back into the storm again. Every step was a fight. Snow piled higher by the minute. The wind pulled at Lucas's coat, like hands trying to drag him backward. Harper kept low, body streamlined, forcing his way forward. When they reached the Keller property, the scene made Lucas's blood run even colder. The woodshed was gone, completely caved in. Debris littered the snow. The Keller house groaned under ice buildup. And then he saw it. A figure collapsed near the broken shed. "Mark!" Lucas shouted. But the wind swallowed the name whole. He pushed forward, heart pounding. Harper reached Mark first, nudging him, barking. The man stirred weakly, snow crusted in his beard. "Tried looking for Mia," he rasped. Lucas clenched his jaw. "She's safe. She's at my cabin." Relief washed over Mark's face. But then a surge of wind nearly knocked all three of them sideways. Lucas had no time to waste. He threw Mark's arm over his shoulder. "Get up. We're leaving." Harper pressed against Mark's other side, helping stabilize him. Step by agonizing step, they fought their way uphill. Lucas slipped twice, but never let go. Harper nudged him each time, giving him the push he needed. Halfway back, the storm surged like a beast reawakened. Snow roared across the ridge, lifting off the ground in violent waves. Lucas felt the rope yerk hard. It had reached its limit, but Harper didn't turn back. The dog sprinted ahead, barking furiously, guiding them through the white, with instinct sharper than sight. Finally, blessedly, the outline of the cabin came into view. Lucas dragged Mark inside, collapsing the door shut behind them. The warmth hit them all like a wave. Mark fell to the floor, gasping. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at Lucas with something deeper than gratitude. "Shame. You saved my daughter," he whispered. "And now me." Lucas said nothing. Harper simply leaned against Mark's shoulder, steady and warm. Outside, the storm raged violently, pounding the cabin like fists, trying to break in. Inside, 5 people were alive, because Lucas and Harper had moved when the town couldn't, and the night wasn't even over. The storm deepened into something unnatural, like the mountain itself was exhaling decades of winter all at once. The cabin shuddered under the assault. Wind clawed at the boards, snow slammed against the roof in waves, and branches cracked like gunshots somewhere in the dark. But inside the stove glowed hot. Blankets layered every surface, and exhausted survivors huddled around the fire. Mia slept soundly now, finally warm. Nora Hayes murmured quiet prayers. Tom Willis leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, still shaking from his ordeal. Mark Keller sat alone at the table, staring at his frostbitten hands, the weight of guilt settling heavily in his shoulders. Lucas stood by the window, Harper beside him, both watching the small world beyond the glass dissolve into white. Neither spoke, neither needed to. A sudden gust struck the cabin with enough force to rattle the beams. Mark, startled. "Good Lord, how much worse can this get?" Lucas's voice was low, steady, bad enough that every second matters. Harper paced, then snapped his head toward the ridge, ears pricked sharply. A deep rumble rolled across the mountain, distant but growing. Lucas stiffened. That sound wasn't from the wind. It was from the earth itself, shifting. He stepped onto the porch. Snow hit him instantly, blinding and heavy, but he could still feel the vibration under his boots. A buildup of ice. Pressure. Weight. Something was giving way somewhere. Harper weighed, pushing his body against Lucas's leg. "We need to check the lower cabins," Lucas said when he stepped back inside. "If the creek rises, or if a tree falls near those chimneys, people might already be in trouble." Mark stood, abruptly. "We should wait for it to calm down." Lucas shook his head. "It won't calm. Not tonight." Tom groaned. "Then, what are you saying? That you're going back out there?" Lucas grabbed his coat. "We are." Harper barked softly. "Ready." Nora's voice trembled. "Lucas, please. You've already saved enough. Let the storm pass." Lucas looked around the small, crowded cabin, every life in it, breathing because he and Harper hadn't waited earlier. Waiting was a luxury the storm didn't allow. "There are others out there," Lucas said quietly. "I'm not leaving them." Mark swallowed, the shame on his face deepening. "Let me come with." "No," Lucas said. "You're frostbitten. You slow down, you die, and I'm not losing anyone tonight." Harper stood tall beside him, fur bristling with focus. Lucas tied the rope around his waist again. "Harper, with me." He opened the door and stepped into the roaring white. Harper plunged ahead, a streak of movement against the storm. Lucas leaned into the wind, gripping the rope. Boots sinking deep into drifts. The cold stung every inch of exposed skin, but he forced his body forward. They reached the treeing before Harper stopped abruptly, ears up, tail stiff. Lucas crouched beside him. "What do you hear?" A faint sound bled through the storm. Not a voice this time. One, and of N, a beam snapping under pressure. Then another, then a muffled cry. Harper shot to the right, tugging the rope. Lucas followed him into the white, until the shape of a cabin materialized. Roof sagging dangerously. Porch nearly buried. The chimney leaned heavily under a mound of snow. Inside, a dim lantern flickered weakly. "Someone's in there," Lucas muttered. He pushed shoulder first into the door. It resisted, frozen, then gave way. Inside, a family of 3, huddled in a corner. Mother, father, a boy no older than 10. Snow drifted through a hole in the roof. The mother's eyes were wide with fear. "Please help us, the roof." A loud crack split the air. Snow and ice groaned overhead. "Move!" Lucas shouted. He hurried them toward the exit, as Harper barked frantically, herding them out. Lucas pushed the boy forward, and that's when it happened. A sharp, violent crack. A section of the roof buckled. Lucas shoved the boy into the snow outside. "Go." Run toward the rope line. The parents scrambled out as Harper leapt aside. But Lucas turned to follow and saw a beam falling straight toward them. Harper saw it first. The dog lunged. "Harper, no!" The beam crashed down, glancing off the edge, sending splinters flying. Harper yelled. Short, sharp, but not from the impact itself. The dog had dodged the blow, but the debris struck one of his hind legs. Harper stumbled, his body collapsing into the snow. Lucas's heart seized. "Harper!" He dove into the drift, scooping the dog into his arms. Harper was conscious, breathing fast, whimpering, his leg bent awkwardly. Not broken beyond repair, but hurt. Hurt badly enough that moving him would be slow. Lucas pressed his forehead to Harper's. "I've got you. I've got you, buddy." The family they'd saved stood frozen outside, horrified. We didn't mean," the father stammered. "Doesn't matter," Lucas said, voice shaking only from the cold. "Hold the rope. Keep moving." The storm howled louder, almost angry. Lucas lifted Harper carefully, bracing the dog's weight against his chest. Harper whimpered again, but didn't struggle. He trusted Lucas completely. The rope line was their only guide home. Lucas gripped it hard and began trudging through the white. The rescued family following behind in single file. Each step was an agony of cold weight and fear. Every time Harper cried softly into his coat, the sound cracked something inside Lucas's chest. "Stay with me," Lucas whispered. "I'm right here." The wind pushed them sideways, but Lucas fought it. His muscles screamed, breath stinging, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Finally, the glow of the cabin emerged through the storm. Mark flung the door open the moment they approached. "My God, what happened?" Lucas staggered inside, with Harper cradled in his arms. The room erupted with motion. Blankets, hands reaching, voices filled with shock and concern. But Lucas didn't hear any of it. He knelt on the floor, lowering Harper gently. The dog trembled but licked Lucas's hand, trying to reassure him instead of seeking reassurance. "You saved them," Lucas whispered, voice cracking. "Even when you got hurt, you saved them." Harper rested his head in Lucas's lap, eyes warm but pained. Outside, the storm raged harder than ever. Inside, the strongest heart on Ashfall Ridge had fallen, but refused to break. Lucas knelt beside Harper on the cabin floor, gently supporting the dog's injured leg. The survivors in the room had gone silent, their fear overshadowed by the sight of the dependable canine lying still for the first time since the storm began. Harper lifted his head only slightly, pressing his nose into Lucas's palm, eyes soft, with pain yet unwavering loyalty. "You did everything you could," Lucas whispered. "More than anyone ever asked of you." Nora Hayes wiped her eyes with a shaking hand. "That dog saved us, Lucas. All of us. Don't let him suffer." "He won't," Lucas said firmly. "Not while I'm here." Mark Keller stood behind Lucas, unable to speak for a long moment. The weight of everything, his mockery, his doubt, his words hung on him like ice. He knelt awkwardly on the other side of Harper. "Lucas," Mark swallowed hard. "I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong about you." Lucas didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed fixed on Harper, gently stroking the dog's trembling side. He wouldn't have gone into that storm if it weren't necessary. Lucas finally said, "Every rescue we've done, he's led it, and he'll keep leading us when he's healed." Harper's tail moved once, slow but certain. A loud bang shook the cabin walls, pulling everyone's attention toward the door. Tom Willis jumped to his feet. What now? What could possibly still be falling apart out there? Lucas stood carefully, pulling a blanket over Harper. "The second wave's in full force," he said. "Trees will keep coming down, sheds, maybe even full rooftops." Mark looked out the frost-covered window. The storm was no longer just a storm. It was a wall of white chaos, bending trees to the ground and swallowing every trace of the world beyond the clearing. "The whole town must be freezing," he whispered. Lucas nodded. Most of them don't have dry firewood now. They're burning wet wood, or nothing at all. Mia stirred from her spot by the stove. My daddy's wood was all soaked. We couldn't get it to burn anymore. Lucas's jaw tensed, which means half the town is sitting in cold darkness right now. Harper let out a soft grunt, as if trying to stand, but Lucas placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Easy. You've done enough for now. The survivors exchanged worried looks. Nora's hands shook as she poured hot water into a tin cup. Lucas, do you think people might be in real danger? They already are, he said quietly. Hypothermia doesn't wait until morning. The cabin door suddenly rattled, knocking, frantic, and unsteady. Lucas and Mark rushed over. Lucas cracked the door open just enough to keep the snow out. A young man stumbled inside. Face blue, hands shaking violently. Lucas caught him before he collapsed. Sheriff Matthews sent me. The man gasped. He said we need help up at the station. They've lost power. The generator's down. People are gathered there cold and terrified. We need firewood. Dry wood. Mark turned to Lucas, stunned. Dry wood. You're the only one up here with enough to spare. Everyone's sheds collapsed. Everyone looked to Lucas. And suddenly, the thing they had mocked, laughed at, recorded on their phones. The structure around his cabin was no longer strange. It was salvation. Lucas grabbed his gloves. We'll load the sled. Tom blinked. The sled? Lucas pointed to the reinforced wooden sled behind the cabin, already half covered in snow. I built it for transport during storms like this. Strong enough to carry wood, people, whatever's needed. The young messenger staggered toward the wall, still shivering uncontrollably. Sheriff said, "If we don't get heat soon, some folks won't make it." Lucas looked at Harper again. The dog lifted his head, eyes bright despite the pain. "You rest," Lucas told him softly. "Well, take it from here." Harper thumped his tail once, a soldier acknowledging an order. Lucas turned to Mark. "I need your help." Mark's expression hardened with resolve. "You've got it." Nora stepped forward too. "Take my blankets. The station's got kids." Tom nodded. "And I'll help load the sled." Within minutes, the cabin was a flurry of movement. Blankets, lanterns, tins of soup, and most importantly, stacks of Lucas's perfectly dry firewood. They loaded everything onto the sled while the storm howled around them. When it was ready, Lucas tied the guiding rope around his waist. Mark took the secondary lead. Tom secured the lanterns. Before Lucas stepped out, he looked back at Harper. One more time. The dog's ears perked weakly. His eyes locked onto Lucas with fierce loyalty. "I'll be back," Lucas promised. Harper blinked slowly, accepting. Lucas opened the door. Cold slammed into the cabin like a living force. Snow swirled violently across the clearing. Trees groaned under the weight of accumulating ice, and somewhere in the valley below, Maplewood Hollow huddled in the dark, waiting. Lucas tightened his grip on the rope. "Let's move." They leaned into the storm, dragging the sled toward town. Every foot forward took strength they didn't know they had. Snow battered their faces. Ice stung their skin. But they pushed because the survivors at the station needed them. Because the storm wasn't giving anyone a chance, because Harper, injured, loyal, unbreakable, had carried them this far. And now, it was their turn to carry the rest. Halfway down the ridge, the storm shifted. The wind eased for a moment. And through the swirling snow, Lucas saw the glow of lanterns moving toward them. Not danger, people. Dozens of them. The town was coming up the mountain. Sheriff Matthews led the way, wrapped in layers of coats and blankets. "We came to help," he shouted. "Bennett, tell us what to do." For the first time since the storm began, hope flickered across Lucas's face. The town had awakened, and now, for the first time, they were ready to follow the man they once mocked. "Help me pull the sled," Lucas yelled. "We're getting everyone through this night together." And Maplewood Hollow roared their answer into the storm. Dozens of hands grabbed the ropes. Boots dug into the snow. Shoulders leaned forward as the weight of the loaded sled fought against the wind. Lanterns swung wildly, casting shaky circles of gold through the swirling whiteout. The storm screamed around them, but for the first time, it did not feel like an unbeatable force. It felt like something they were pushing back against. Sheriff Matthews shouted orders, guiding people into rows behind Lucas. Mark Keller trudged beside him, face raw from windburn, but determination etched into every line as they descended toward town. The silhouettes of homes emerged like ghosts. Dark windows, buried porches, roofs heavy with snow. Fear crept into every step. The station came into view, a long wooden building nearly buried to its window frames. Lanterns flickered inside, shadows moving frantically behind the frosted glass. Lucas felt the urgency, like a pulse in his throat. "We made it," Matthews called ahead. "Get ready to unload." When they finally reached the door, townsfolk rushed out, shivering, desperate, faces pale, with the early signs of cold exhaustion. A mother sobbed as Lucas placed 2 logs into her shaking hands. A father wrapped his son in one of Nora's blankets. Firewood was passed into the building like lifelines, 1 log at a time. Inside, the station transformed from a cold tomb into a safe haven. Flames flared. People huddled close. Children stopped crying. The crackling of fire became the sound of hope returning. Lucas stepped back outside, breath heavy in the freezing air. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the slightest relief. Not victory, not pride, just the knowledge that lives had been saved. Mark approached slowly, the wind tugging at his coat. "I can't thank you enough," he said, voice tight with emotion. "You gave us a chance tonight." Lucas wiped frost from his beard. "We made it through, because everyone stepped up." "No," Mark insisted. "We made it because you prepared, when nobody else did." It was then Mark noticed the dark smear on Lucas's glove, dried blood from Harper. "Is he okay?" Mark's voice broke. "He will be," Lucas said quietly. "As long as he rests." Mark lowered his eyes. "I owe that dog my daughter's life." Lucas didn't reply. He just nodded and looked back toward the ridge where his cabin sat under a blanket of storm-dark clouds. Sheriff Matthews joined them, wiping snow from his coat. "Once this clears, people are going to want answers," he said. "They want to understand why you knew why you built all that." Lucas breathed out slowly. "I'll tell them tomorrow morning," Matthew said. "Town hall. People will be there." Lucas hesitated, not out of fear, but because the memories behind his reasons were ones he rarely allowed himself to revisit. But he nodded. "Tomorrow." The sheriff squeezed his shoulder. "Good. Folks are ready to listen now." When morning came, the storm had thinned, but not vanished. Snow still drifted from the sky, and a heavy silence clung to Maplewood Hollow. Lucas walked into town, with Harper limping at his side, the dog refusing to stay behind despite the injury. Each step was slow but proud. Children ran up to greet him, offering Harper gentle pats. Adults stepped aside respectfully, some lowering their hats. For once, no one avoided Lucas Bennett. They welcomed him. Inside the town hall, the room was packed. Families wrapped in blankets, elders with hands folded, Men and women who had been laughing at him only days earlier, now waiting with solemn eyes. Lucas walked to the front. Harper lay at his feet, curling his injured leg beneath him. Sheriff Matthews cleared his throat. "Lucas, people want to hear what that structure around your cabin really is. Why you built it. What you saw coming." Lucas drew a slow breath. Then he opened the small black weather-worn notebook he carried everywhere. "It started overseas," he said, voice steady but low, on a mountain that looked a lot like Ashfall Ridge. The room fell silent. My team and I were hit by a sudden freeze. Supplies gone, fuel gone, no dry wood. We tried everything to stay warm, but cold doesn't negotiate. It doesn't show mercy. He didn't describe the worst of it. He didn't have to. Faces in the room already showed heartbreak. "I made a promise that night," Lucas continued, eyes on the notebook. "If I ever lived in a place where winter could kill, I'd never let another person suffer the way my brothers did." He turned the notebook toward them, revealing sketches of beams, angles, and load-bearing supports. "This isn't a bunker," he said. "It's a cold survival frame, designed to protect firewood from collapse, moisture, and snow load failure, designed to keep people alive." Murmurs moved through the room. Astonishment, regret, realization. Mark Keller stood. "We called him crazy. He built the one thing that saved this town." Nora Hayes covered her mouth. "That dog saved me, because Lucas trained him to." Sheriff Matthews nodded heavily. "We were wrong. All of us." Lucas didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply closed the notebook. "I didn't build it to prove anything," he said. "I built it because winter doesn't give second chances." Harper lifted his head at Lucas's voice. The entire room turned to him, a tired but loyal guardian. A little girl approached, holding a small wooden plaque. She knelt beside Harper and whispered, "Thank you for saving my daddy." Harper licked her hand gently. Lucas placed a hand on the dog's back, and for once his eyes softened at the gathering before him. They were no longer skeptics. They were a community reborn. "Spring will come," Lucas said, "and when it does, I'll teach anyone who wants to build one of these. No charge." The room erupted, not in applause, but in something stronger. Unity, gratitude, hope, and Harper, ears perk despite the pain, seemed to understand perfectly. For the first time, Maplewood Hollow didn't just see Lucas Bennett. They saw the protector he had always been. They saw the truth. And somehow that simple shift, one town finally understanding one man, felt like the first warm breeze after a year-long winter. The storm passed 2 days later, not quietly, not gently, but with a kind of reluctant retreat. Only the mountains understood. Snow still clung to rooftops like heavy white blankets, and ice hung from every porch rail in sheets thick as glass. Pines bowed under the weight of frozen drifts. The world looked bruised, battered, but alive. Lucas stepped out of the cabin into a cold so sharp it nipped his skin. But sunlight finally broke through the gray. It shimmered off the snow in bright, blinding diamonds. He took a slow breath, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. At his side, Harper limped forward. Still sore, still healing, but proud as ever, his breath curling softly in the morning light. "You're doing better today," Lucas murmured. Harper's tail made a small but certain wag. The valley below stirred with movement. Neighbors were out, bundled, limping, exhausted, but standing. Smoke rose from chimneys again. Laughter, faint and shaky, drifted through the frigid air. Children trudged through knee-deep snow to check on friends. Men leaned on shovels. Women carried blankets to homes where heat had only recently returned. Survival had a sound to it, and Maplewood Hollow was making it. As Lucas walked down toward town, people waved to him from their porches. Not tentative waves, not cautious nods, but something warm, almost proud. Nora Hayes stopped sweeping her steps and lifted a thermos. Hot cocoa for the man of the hour. Lucas chuckled. "Morning, Nora. You saved this old ridge," she said. "Don't you dare argue." He didn't. Harper nudged her leg gently, and Nora smiled. Wiping away tears she pretended weren't there. Farther down, Mark Keller jogged up the path, still limping from the storm, but carrying the energy of someone who'd found a new purpose. "Lucas," he called, breath fogging. "You heading to the meeting?" "Sheriff asked me too," Lucas said. "He asked all of us," Mark replied. Then looked down at Harper, softening. "Hey, buddy, thank you again for bringing my little girl home." Harper leaned into Mark's hand, acceptance given in the quiet language only dogs knew. When they reached the town square, the meeting had already begun. A large chalkboard was propped up in the center, flanked by stacks of lumber and tools. Sheriff Matthews stood with a clipboard, but his usual authoritative posture had shifted. Today, he wasn't the one in charge. He was waiting for Lucas. People parted instinctively as Lucas approached. Harper walked beside him like a general alongside his commander. The murmurs quieted, eyes turned. The air took on a reverent stillness. Matthews gestured broadly. "Lucas Bennett," he said, "is going to show us how to be ready next time. How to build structures that actually survive a winter like this." Lucas raised a hand, calmer than he felt. "I can help, but we build together. No heroes here." The sheriff chuckled. "You say that, but half the valley owes you their lives." Lucas looked at Harper. "We did what anyone should do." "Not everyone could, though," Mark said from the crowd. "Not everyone had the guts to run into that storm, or the sense to prepare before it hit." Lucas swallowed, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest. The weight of memories, the ghosts of men he couldn't save in another lifetime, on another mountain. He turned to the chalkboard. "All right," he said softly. "Let's begin." He sketched the frame, the angles, the supports, the airflow design, the snow load distribution. People leaned forward in fascination. Questions flew. Hands lifted. Even the children watched as if he were teaching magic. Harper lay at Lucas's feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert. Every so often, a child would sneak close to pet him, and Harper would lift his head, accepting the affection with quiet dignity. When the lesson ended, Mark stepped forward. "We want to build one for every home," he said, "before next winter." "Count me in," someone shouted. "And me." "Same here." Lucas looked around the room at the raised hands, the determined faces, the unity woven from hardship, and something inside him loosened. For the first time since coming home from service, he didn't feel like a man walking through the world alone. He felt like he belonged. Spring arrived earlier than anyone expected. With it came the sound of saws buzzing across the ridge. Children helped carry planks. Couples held ladders for each other. Teenagers stained new beams. And Lucas, quiet, steady, patient, moved from house to house, teaching, correcting, lifting, building. Harper accompanied him everywhere, now fully healed, now stronger than ever. The dog became something of a legend on the ridge. People left treats on their porches for him. Children drew pictures of him in school. One woman even knitted him a scarf that he proudly wore for a single day before rolling in the grass and destroying it completely. No one minded. By June, 12 new cold survival frames stood proudly across Maplewood Hollow. They glowed amber in the sunlight, each one a shield built from a lesson learned the hard way and from the courage of one veteran and one dog. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies and painted the sky in gold and lavender, the town gathered for a community dinner. Tables stretched across the square. Fire pits glowed. Music played softly. Laughter rose like warm air. Sheriff Matthews clinked a spoon against his mug. To Lucas Bennett he said, "The man who taught us that survival isn't luck, it's preparation." And to Harper, Nora Hayes added, lifting her cup, "The bravest heart on Ashfall Ridge." The crowd erupted in cheers. Harper barked once, short, proud, sending the children into giggles. Lucas shook his head, embarrassed, but touched. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. Praise had never been his destination. But now, surrounded by neighbors who had once feared him and now trusted him, he allowed himself a small smile. Later, when the gathering quieted, Lucas and Harper walked home under a sky full of stars. The snow had melted. The air smelled like pine and new earth, and from every home, warm light spilled from windows, promising a future that no longer felt fragile. Lucas stopped at the edge of his property. His own structure, the first, the blueprint for all the others, stood solid and graceful, its beams catching the moonlight. He rested a hand on Harper's back. "Mission accomplished again, buddy," he said softly. Harper pressed his head into Lucas's palm, releasing a gentle, contented sigh. For the first time since leaving the service, Lucas didn't feel like he was running from winter. He felt like he had faced it and changed the world around him because of it. And somewhere deep in the quiet of Ashfall Ridge, carried on a soft night wind, came the feeling that he and Harper were no longer outsiders. They were home. They were needed. They were exactly where they were meant to be. And winter would never catch Maplewood Hollow unprepared again. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. Just something small to let me know you're still here with us on this journey. And if Lucas and Harper's courage meant something to you today, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories of loyalty, survival, and second chances coming your way. And I'd be honored to have you with us for the next one. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the comments.